Season 6 of the Missing Witches podcast is sponsored in part by Foxglove Farm. Go to Foxglove Farm, that's farm with a PH, like pharmacy.com, and use offer code MISSINGWITCHES when you sign up for your monthly subscription box of witchy delights. And sponsored by listeners like you. You who join our Patreon and come to our coven meetings. You who buy our book. Recommend it to your friends and review it online. We thank you. And if you love this episode, tip us at paypal.me/missingwitches.
We are many and we will not be silenced. Mayor Jenny Durkin and those you've elected and appointed to your office, we find you guilty of crimes against the most vulnerable members of this city. By permitting the gathering of Joey Gibson, Matt Marshall, and their followers, you are guilty of white supremacist terrorism and collusion with Nazis.
You aren't being a proper woman, therefore you must be a witch. You must be a witch.
Welcome back to another episode of the Missing Witches podcast, Witches Found. Today we are joined by Ylva Mara Radziszewski. Was I close? And I could introduce you for days, but I want our listeners to know how you would introduce yourself, so I'll allow you.
Awesome. Thank you. My name is Ylva Marajania Radziszewski. I go by Ylva Mara for short. I am a trans, non-binary witch. I am a white person of mixed Roma, Slavic, Balkan ancestry. I also am somebody who comes from the Ashkenazi Jewish diaspora, but that's something I am slowly starting to reconnect from or to. And I am a professional witch. I run the School of Traditional Magic, my website, traditionalmagic.com, if you're interested. On Instagram, my handle is Bimbo Yaga, BIMBOYAGA. I identify also as a system. I live as somebody with DID. I also am somebody who is a survivor of sexual assault and incest. And a lot of my work is centered in advocacy for, self-advocacy, basically.
Yes.
Asking for the space we need, taking up the space we need, and providing opportunities for others to do the same. And I'm just so grateful to be here.
And I'm so grateful to be looking at your beautiful smiling faces. You are emanating like a joy and a connection that's wonderful to behold. Thank you so much for being here today. Now, something that is very much a part of your practice, and I think even, let me get it exactly right, the tagline for the Living Altar, and we can get into the Living Altar, of course, but...
I didn't even introduce the Living Altar. I was so, I guess so nervous.
Well, when you're as prolific a person as you are, then it can become difficult to list all of our activities in a cohesive manner. But we're talking about it now. The tagline is a radical witch's altar for magical resistance. And again, this is thanks again to Melissa James for providing the clip that we heard at the beginning of the episode, and also for introducing me to your work. Her documentary that she was working on was about this notion of magical resistance. It's something that we talk about all the time on the podcast. Can you talk to our listeners about how magic and resistance are linked?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying the work that I co-facilitate through the Living Altar with my art partner, Kiki Robinson of the Opulent Witch on Instagram, is it's an active ritual to help both Kiki and I ground in our everyday lived experience as people who exist and try to survive within marginalized identities and politicized identities. And who also live in connection with a community of folks who experience marginalization and the politicization of their bodies on the daily. And a lot of what we began working on through the Living Altar was grounding ourselves in, just being able to connect our lived experience as people, as witches, and as artists with our roles in community. And so when I think about the idea of magic and the practice of witchcraft and the role of witch in community, we say that the witch seeks to disrupt, the witch seeks to name what is true, or at least create opportunities for earnest and honest conversation within self and amongst others. And I think that when we talk about radical practices within magical tradition, what we consider radical or what we consider radicalized in our modern zeitgeist under late stage capitalism within patriarchal structures of oppression have always been judicious forms of intercession by people who carry wisdom for community. And we really think that this is what the witch does, is we carry wisdom for community, and we help access spaces of wisdom and generosity within ourselves and within connections to others. And so when we think about like a radical altar for magical resistance, we're thinking like, let ourselves liberate ourselves first from the constraints of organized systemic oppression, and then be empowered to be accountable to places where that those systems live inside of us, where we benefit from those systems, where we perpetuate those systems, and do the silent work of internal negotiation and internal remediation, which allows us to be more accessible and more available, not only to self, but to collective. I like to say that the School of Traditional Magic is a medium through which we access the identity of community witchcraft. There's so much historic precedence around the witch as a solo practitioner, or in isolation, or like as living on the fringe, being inaccessible, being untouchable, which in so many ways is true because of the nature of our work when we're in practice for community as steward of these ways of tradition and these wisdom ways. We do need space. We do need space to cultivate those relationships, and we do need space to get the work done in the ways that it needs to get done. And that's not always an easy place for others to meet us, So I think like there is historic precedence for the witch as a lonely figure, but the witch is able to maintain sovereignty and exist within a liminal state because of their connections with others. Their connection not only to nature, the spirits of land and place, the spirits of our ancestors, but also as a gift of resource to our relationships with community members. And so when I think about the radical altar of magical resistance that the Living Altar sort of came into being as, it really is something that externalizes an internal dream, I think that Kiki and I both share, which is that the witch returns to collective, that the wisdom of the witch return to collective, and that the witch returns to a seat of counsel in collective, and that it doesn't have to be anything so profound. Like the most powerful magic is the most silent and subtle most often. I think about that in terms of like my ancestral heritage of being a person of Vulcan and Roma ancestry, but also being Slavic. Like in the Polish witches, the traditional healers are called whisperers, and a lot of that is a means of survival. You know, it's assimilative practices. You don't go around talking about stuff, but also like um, you don't need to. You don't need to uh, talk about your power in order to wield it or to, you know what I mean? So I think the radical aspect of modern witchcraft that the work that we do represents is the subtlety and helping helping to provide space for the individual to return to collective in subtle ways, in and letting those subtleties of character be profound gifts of generosity. Like you don't have to be a celebrity witch. You don't have to have power or have impact. You know, um, you don't have to be loud about things for the impact to be substantial. And you know, half of the things, I think most of the blessings we offer to our lives through living are silent and subtle moments that even we might not recognize.
I know that a lot of the witches I speak to are still in the quote unquote broom closet. And something that I've been thinking about a lot, as someone with like a witch weather vane on my house who has been, you know, a very out and loud since birth. But I tell them you can be a secret weapon.
Yeah.
You know, and your magic can be a secret weapon. And, you know, maybe it's just, once again, this late stage capitalism that tells us that we need to be loud and profiteering, you know, off of everything. But it also made me think of something that White Feather Hunter said to me once. We were talking about ritual, and White Feather was talking about, you know, the energy of community and raising this energy together. And so I asked, you know, what about when we're practicing alone? And everything you were saying made me think of her response, which was like a blanket that I cover myself in. She kind of scoffed. She was like, well, you're never alone when you're doing ritual. And I mean, it's so obvious in the speaking, you know, we are contacting our ancestors, or as you say, the land spirits. This notion of witch community being community even in solitude is really, really comforting to me.
I agree. I want to clarify too, like as a white person who is a colonizer on unceded territories, indigenous land in so-called United States, and where I'm talking to you from, I'm on Point Elliott Treaty land, the Coast Salish Duwamish territory in Seattle. When I talk about working with land spirits as a white person, as a colonizer on land that's not my ancestral home, I'm talking about working magic in a way that puts me in a place of understanding that this is not my home, that this is not, these spirits owe me nothing. I'm not entitled to a relationship here, but I must do what I can to honor and respect Indigenous-led land sovereignty movement. With everything I do, it must be in my mind, it must be in my actions, and it, like the idea of radical witchcraft is one that says this isn't just about breaking intergenerational curses. This isn't just about addressing and combating systemic level, you know, settler colonized curses through hierarchical systems of oppression, like battling those systems. But it's also about slowing down and being quiet and doing what you're told and being asked to do by Indigenous-led movements who are stewards of land and place. And as a witch, we have to understand that our magic, our magic comes from lots of places, but it's borrowed. Magic is borrowed energy. It moves through the world. Magic doesn't belong to anyone. And the point of the practice of magic or the practice of a witch isn't to access power or to raise and gain power for self. It's to place ourselves in that current of magic as it moves through the world and uplift it and direct it, and to be a conduit in service to what is already naturally occurring. And so that either looks like being in service to disrupting what's actually occurring presently, being in service to redirecting energy towards more beneficial outcomes. But our magic is borrowed, and without relationship to the elemental forces, which are our ancient ancestors, and those elements exist everywhere on this planet, and the universe. I mean, my God, let's talk about the cosmos for a second. Like, geek out about that. Cosmic sexual here, but
I'm sorry, I have never heard the term cosmosexual before. I don't know if you invented it just right now on the spot, but I'm putting it in my notes. Carry on.
Kiki and I talk about this a lot. We just geek out about space, but what I'm trying to say is, when we're working with the elements who are our ancestors, we must understand that where we exist in time and space in corporeal form, the spirit exists as well, and they borrow the corporeal forms around us. And we can work with the land, we can work with the spirits that are here and the ancestors that are here to connect us to our own ancestors, the ancestors of our lineages, the ancestors of the land where our bodies were born from, but also where our ancestors were born from. And so I don't know, I guess I don't know really how to like frame it, except to say, if you're a colonizer on unceded land, and indigenous land on Turtle Island, especially, when we're working with the spirit who show up for the work, don't take for granted the fact that they're there, and don't stop at their presence. Like, sometimes when we call out to a spirit, they'll show up because they hear us and they're like, "You okay?" Like, "What's up, baby?" And then we're like, "Oh, you're my helping spirit." And it's like, "Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was just in the next room and I heard you and I just wanted to check on you. Can I call your grandma for you? Like, can I help you find your own spirit connections?" Like, we have to understand, like, we aren't entitled to these relationships. I can't say it enough. Like, these are relationships. They require work. And I think a lot of times, because we are so disconnected from culture of origin, especially as colonizers, that and we exist within a forced separation of culture. Like, we literally exist in systems that cleave indigeneity from the stewards of land and place who are here, who are fighting for their lives, that we take for granted that we're owed something. So I just, like, that's also what we mean by, like, a radical practice of witchcraft. It's just being honest. Like, nobody owes me anything here. In fact, even having this conversation with you across the border of two colonized lands in false nation states, like, we're being permitted by the spirits to do this, and we're taking up a lot of space that isn't ours to take up and having these conversations, but they are needing to be had. So even in this conversation, we have to acknowledge the immense privileges that we are leaning into, and the way that perpetuates even further colonized settler the settler colonialism that we benefit from. So when I say spirits of land, I'm also talking about that. And I'm also talking about, like, the constant the constant intention of reconnecting across oceans and across diaspora. I also am a person who comes from lineages of diaspora, and so I'm talking about connecting through those histories to the places where my family recognized the spirits, and the spirits recognize them. And as somebody of Roma ancestry, it's like, whew, we have no land, we have no home. So the ritual of reconnecting is one that's constantly returning to my body.
Yeah. And honestly, I think one of the most important parts of my practice as I, evolve and season as a witch is that recognition of a colonial mentality that still exists, buried deep within my heart and brain, what I am entitled to, and working through all of that, I think, is an excellent, continual first step in practice.
I treat it like I treat my practice of witchcraft like I would my practice of just being in relationship with friends, lovers, family. It's like I don't owe. I have to work. I have to work on these relationships. I have to work for safety. I have to work to like trust, and that's something that I think is so often left out of the conversation, particularly with like a more social media driven contemporary culture. Like there's not a lot of room for nuance, unfortunately, but there's a lot of space for connection, which is great. But just like remember to slow down. In our world is so our modern world is so manipulated by the illusion of meritocracy, so rooted in capitalism, which is crumbling, and superiority, which is shattering, that it wants us to speed up. It wants us to work harder, fight harder, move faster, so we don't recognize or see the cracks in the veneer, so we don't recognize the facade as a facade. We don't see it crumbling. So I think the more we slow down and bring intention, even to the sound bites, even to like the immediacy of connection that is so often a salvation for so many across social media, like just understanding that we can take a moment, like the urgency of the fall of late stage capitalism is not our crisis, like yeah, but the impact is our responsibility. Yeah.
That leads perfectly into a little quote I want to read from your book, A Practical Guide for Witches. And I love the book. It is very that. It's thorough. I actually wrote an endorsement for the book in which I said that I think it would be equally useful for like a quote unquote baby witch as it would be for a seasoned crone. There's so much great stuff in there. Do you want to talk a little bit about the process of writing the book and why you chose to be to sort of cast a wide net with the topic of your book, and then I'll get to my quote that I wanted to read.
Sure. Yeah, that feels good.
Yeah.
A Practical Guide for Witches is a book that I wrote. Okay, I'm all about honesty and intimacy, and I'm working real hard on that, so I'm going to get sappy for a second. Virgo sun, Aquarius moon over here. But I wrote this book at a time in my life where things were really changing so quickly and being held together with such so many miracles. It was a wonder I didn't collapse. And I wrote this book during that time of tremendous heartbreak, reevaluation, and on a deadline, right? So I'm healing, I'm healing from some pretty intense like stuff that's going down, and I'm like, I have a deadline, baby. We gotta, like, I know that you've been crying at 3 a.m., but like it's 6 a.m. It's time to write,
I need to stop you for 1 second. Would you recommend healing on a deadline? because it sounds like it was kind of a positive and fruitful experience for you, but to me it sounds counterintuitive.
Oh, it literally was so painful. And the reason I say it that way, because like I had to write this book. I was under contract, right? I'm like, okay, I have to write this book. You know what it's like when you're contracted. Your book is amazing. And so it's like when you're on a deadline and you're asked to share, when you're asked to share wisdom and insight, for me as a witch, when I was asked that of the book, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to do this generously, and I want to be very earnest about it. So I wrote this book to heal my heartbreak, and as I was doing that, I also started to understand, like, growing up, I needed a different kind of resource. And so I wrote this book for the younger parts of myself who didn't have access to, I grew up poor. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Florida, in the swamps of Okeechobee. And I grew up just not having access to a lot of the information I had to learn, and was generous with myself around that. So I wrote this book as almost like an invitation to my younger selves to accept aspects of our craft and aspects of our identity through magic. And I did so in a way that I hope is also an invitation for other people to, again, slow down and be reflective. I wrote this book to help soften the need for self-reflection, re-examination, and hopefully to provide resource for folks to reassess our value system as witches. And this is not perfect. It's a start. It's a start of a conversation. The conversation I hope it starts is, what are we actually doing here? Like, what do we actually believe? Like, why are we doing these things? And so much of modernized witchcraft has been misappropriated from stolen culture, and has been so appropriated through the cis heteropatriarchal lens that it's actually violent, but nobody talks about that. But as a trans person, as a non-binary person, and as a person from cultures that have been stolen from, let's talk about the tarot for a second. And like this fixation of Gaja, non-Roma people, with fortune telling, it's like, okay, well, we have to slow down and start to say, okay, I have a home. Where is it? And it's inside of me first. And is what I'm practicing what I actually believe? So that's a long-winded way of saying, like, I wrote this book as an invitation for witches to give ourselves permission to do better with what we know, and to allow ourselves to learn what we don't know, and to really reassess.
Yeah, you said I do have a home. My home is inside of me. I'm going to add that square to the quilt blanket that I put over myself. That's a beautiful reminder to everyone. I do have a home. My home is inside me. Okay, let me read this. Let me read this short excerpt. Again, from A Practical Guide for Witches. Listeners, if you haven't picked it up, it really is wonderful. And it's beautiful, too. It's beautiful.
The art. Oh!
Can you tell me the name of your illustrator? I'm blanking.
The interior and cover design was by Stephanie Mautone, Mautone. And then the illustrations are by Tara O'Brien.
Tara O'Brien, that's the name, yeah. Because they're comforting. That's the word that I think of, like they're just lovely. Anyway, listeners, go pick up the book. You can get an e-version, but I like to hold things in my hands.
The cover is so velvet. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, you can pet it. It can be your familiar. Okay, here we go. Our modern world is troubled. Sadly, we find ourselves in the grip of unprecedented global strife and crisis. At times, it can feel overwhelming or impossible to access joy or hope. Yet, the work of the witch is to draw strength from the past and the natural world and cast that blessing into our current reality as a seed of hope. We must remember, as Dr. Clarissa Pinocchia Estes writes in her essay of the same title, we were made for these times. There may not have ever been a more vital time to access magic. The world needs you, witch. Can you speak to that moment of writing or expand on the idea?
I forgot that I wrote that. As you were reading it, it kind of made me a little teary.
Me too, when I read it the first time and the second time and the third time.
I just believe it. I believe it. It's so true. I guess is what I have to say. Yeah, it's the truth, I think.
So how does magic or rituals, specifically rituals, I'm always interested in people's rituals, how do they benefit us individually, and then how does that ripple into our culture, into our society?
I think for me, in my experience and I'll speak from my experience as a high priestess who has learned from a lot of trial and error, and also in the blessing of having the opportunity to witness my students coming into their own practice. And I feel like our rituals help us first to connect to ourselves. And I think that's such an important reminder, is that magic is rooted in an inward reflection. Magic must come from a place of, our practice of magic must come from a place of inward reflection. It must be rooted somewhere deep inside of us, the inner altar that's inside of us. And because inside of that place, also bear in mind, I am somebody who lives with DID, I'm somebody who lives with CPTSD, and I'm somebody who has spent a lot of time in therapy. So, so a lot of this is just informed by the need to survive. I needed to understand how to choose to live, how to choose life. And so when I think about the practice of witchcraft and our rituals, they're meant to fortify us. They're meant to root us in our own lived experience, and they're meant to bring us to places of honesty around what it is we did experience. And not only experience from others, but experience through the process of enacting in the world. So we have to take responsibility for those impacts, right? So when I think about personal ritual, what it does for us is it helps us come to a place of earnest and honest care of self. And I think from that place, we then get to decide what I'm available for, what I'm not available for, what I'll stand for, what I won't stand for, and gets us really clear about what our actual resources are and what they aren't. And then when we talk about external ritual, or how our rituals ripple out into community, it's, resource distribution, baby. It's practical. I can't stress it enough that the trope of the magical, mystical witch it's a trope. It's a trope that we both historically, we as witch were responsible for casting out into the world as a means of protection and assimilation, but it's also one that is drawn upon centuries of racialization and racial oppression of indigenous people, Black folks, Roma folks, Jews, and anyone non-Christian and non-white and non-Western European. And so when we overly exotify or fetishize the identity of witch, we are further cleaving the relationship between stewardship of land and place, stewardship of magic, stewardship of our relationships, and yeah, that gap that is created is so impassable to fill. So our rituals must bring us to a place of self-groundedness, self-rootedness, and then as it ripples out, it must, I think, bring us to a place of honest redistribution of resource, whether that's texting a friend and being available for a difficult conversation, whether that's, oh, I've got some financial flow, so I'm going to redistribute my financial wealth across mutual aid. Everything we do is an opportunity for blessing. Everything we do, like every time I Venmo somebody, I'm like putting the little Matis in there, little evil eyes. I'm putting little lipsticks. I'm putting, all these little, I'm using technology and making these little emojis for spells of abundance. And it allows us to really focus, really focus our impact so that it's the deepest, biggest impact possible without a lot of other fluff. I'm a maximalist, so you know what I mean? Like, I'm a maximalist. I have big presence. I love stuff. I love making a big to-do. I love public ritual. I love just going all out. But that comes in time. And I think we're able to get big when we've spent time honoring the intimate.
Honoring the intimate. I like that. And that speaks to sort of the whisperer that you talked about before. When you mentioned emoji spells, the first face that popped into my head was that of Edgar Fabian Frias. To me, the highest magic of emoji in my experience has come from Edgar. And I recently actually watched a YouTube video that the two of you did together. Transcestor Portal. Can you talk a little bit about opening a portal? I mean, I'll put the video in the show notes. It's so beautiful. The silver bowl. It really is like an emotional watching experience. So again, I'll put it in the show notes for our listeners. But can you talk about this notion of opening a portal?
Yeah. Gosh, there's so much to say. Maybe I'll start with the idea of a transistor portal and then see if that is what I want to talk about.
Perfect.
And see if that answers, if that satisfies the inquiry. So, when I think about portals, I think about portals as creating an intentional connection across planes of existence, where we can meet and share relationship with ideas, energies, concepts, memories, broken promises, failed efforts, dreams that are no longer viable for corporeal manifestation, dreams that have manifested and we've moved on from, the future. Like, it's whatever we are needing to find or wanting to find or wanting to connect with in order to find comfort, to find strength, to find resilience, to affirm identity. Creating portals is an opportunity to create an intentional connection through planes of existence so that we can draw upon the energy that meets those expectations or meets those intentions. And I think anytime we pray for creating a portal, I think that anytime a portal of access, if I think about portals as points of access, right? Every time I say hello to a friend, that's creating a portal of access. This conversation is a portal. It's creating another opportunity for relationships across our communities, between you and I, between our life experiences. It's a way I see it. I see portals as like the way spiders weave webs. I see portals as the way like ocean currents meet I see them as like this almost like magical wormholes, like we kind of like they're doors that open quite naturally into energy veins that are already in motion, possibilities that are already in motion. Sometimes these portals have to be forced open, sometimes they have to be forged anew, but it's again, there are these access points to possibilities and access points to relationships. And then when we open portals, we have to tend to them, right? So if we're creating an access, if we're creating a connection, we're responsible for it. And it doesn't mean we have to be sitting there every day talking to it. But it means that when we're not there talking to it, we close it. Like we close the door, we lock the door. It's a sacred thing. We want to make sure that it's held in sacredness, and we also want to make sure that we're not just like cleaving reality. I'm saying cleaving a lot. Cleaving must be the word of the day. I don't even think I'm using it correctly. We can't just be like rending the veil and then walking away and being like, bye y'all. And then timelines get mashed up. And, I think that ultimately the natural world has a way of course correcting, but we don't want to leave messes. We don't want to make it more difficult in already difficult times.
Yes. Yeah. And this notion of leaving the door open, for lack of a better term, is something that you think will make things more difficult?
I think that it depends. I think that it can. I think, we can leave doors open for, oh God, okay. So I think where it could be appropriate to leave a door open is in relationships where misunderstanding has occurred, where harm has been or hurt has been done. I think that's appropriate to leave a door open. And I think where it's also appropriate metaphysically to leave doors open is in conversations, inner world conversations between myself and my best self, or my I don't want to say like highest self or most exalted self, because I think like it's something I'm trying to really understand as a form of meritocracy that I don't like, that I internalize. Like it's not about the best self, the better self, the higher self, the perfect self. That doesn't exist. To me, that's not real, but it's like the part of us that really aspires towards honoring the fullest picture we have access to. I think that's an appropriate door to leave open. But I think like when we're opening portals to, say, the ancestral realm, meaning literal gateways for the ancestors and spirits of the dead to commune with us or to pass through this into this world, there are other ways that spirits can enter the world. And so I don't think necessarily that a witch accidentally leaving an ancestral portal open is bad, because the spirits are going to find access anyway. But I'm a Virgo, so I like things to be tidy, I like to be, and I'm also very flighty because I'm like, what's next? So I'm like, I want to make sure that it's my protocol to open and close, so I can move on. I'm the kind of person that when I leave my house, I'm like, knowing full well I didn't cook anything that morning, I think, did I leave the stove on? And I'm like, honey, you didn't even turn the stove on. Like, but I left it on. You're like, I'm that kind of person, So it wreaks havoc inside of me. And I think that's also something true. Like when we open portals, we anchor them. So if we aren't closing portals we've opened, then the havoc that's wreaked most likely is just internal chaos.
Right. There's something on the Living Altar website. I don't know if it was you specifically who wrote these like couple sentences, or if it was Kiki, or if it was something that you two did together. But it seems kind of fit with what we're saying. I am the eye through which the ancestors thread their potential. I am precision, My ceremony emboldens liberation for all. Can you like unpack that last sentence for us again? I don't know if it was you or Kiki specifically, but my ceremony emboldens liberation for. I think that's kind of what we've been talking about this whole time. But it's a nice sentence to sort of boil it down to. My ceremony emboldens liberation for all.
Yeah, that's the spell for the ancestor card for the living altar. So I'll do a quick introduction to the living altar specifically here because I think it'll help make sense. But the living altar is an oracle deck that Kiki and I started working on in 2017 that finally was published last year. And it is a physical embodiment of the witch's wheel. It's meant to be both an oracular tool for practitioners, but also a study guide for practitioners and anyone interested in witchcraft and magic. And what it does is it creates each card is an embodiment of an aspect of the natural cycle of nature. The natural cycle of nature, it's so redundant. The cycle of nature as represented by like the turning of the seasons, the maturation process of organic life from birth to maturity to death. And so each card is a spell that incorporates the totality of these universal principles, and we can work with them not only as like spells to, or like tools to empower our spells that specifically draw upon those energies, but also we can ask them questions and turn to them as counsel. We can turn to death as counsel. We can turn to the ancestors as counsel. We can turn to the earth, air, fire, and water as counsel. And which I think is another way of honoring those relationships. It's not just like asking for what you want. It's about asking for what you should be doing, you know?
Oh, definitely. You know,
I want this, I want that. Also, like, what would you have me be doing? Just like, FYI, can I check in? But the spell of the ancestor, you know, the every ritual, everything I do is a ritual in liberation, to serve in liberation for all. It's like, we're not alone in this. We're not alone. The fallacy of individualism is an imperialist notion. It's so insidious. It drives us all mad. I mean, this is the principle behind burnout. This is the principle behind selling out people we love for a quick whatever. So when everything we do is community-oriented witches, which I think all modern witches should really be thinking about, our communal impact. I think all modern witches are community witches. We should really be moving that way. I think, not little Virgo mom over here, but you know, we really should be thinking about this. Our impact is tremendous. So why not in every spell we cast include a prayer for collective? Why not in every, even personal spells? Like every time I cast a personal spell for self-love, or, you know, a successful contract, or, you know, to successfully complete an art project I'm working on, even if I never share it with another person, I'm praying for collective creativity. You know, I'm praying, I don't know why I raised my hand. I'm praying for collective understanding. I'm praying for collective abundance. And, you know, like that is what we mean by it. So every time we raise energy, and this is also coming from like me growing up in little swampy areas in Florida. I really got connected to the reclaimist tradition of witchcraft that was co-founded by Starhawk. And so a lot of the communities I was a part of as a wee witch were reclaimist in nature. And a lot of the focus of reclaimist witchcraft is on collective, or it has become focused on collective. And so I really draw inspiration from that particular vibe of the craft.
Yeah, you said when I was a wee witch, and I assume you meant small, little, young. But in my mind, I was like a wee witch, like capital W-E, us, you know, ours, witch. And I was like, I'm a wee witch too. Like we can all be wee witches. And I love that. I love that. I think that you're totally right. You know, I'm the same way. You know, all of my spell work has some element of communal blessing, or, you know, gratitude, or, you know, imploring or yearning. But there's always some sort of, and again, I return to what Whitefeather said to me, which was, you know, you're never alone when you're doing ritual. Even if you are a solitary practitioner, even if you're in the broom closet, even if, you know, no one understands you and you feel like you don't have a community, you do. You're never alone. And it's, as you've been articulating, like, very important to center that as we go forward with this, like, magical resistance that we are forming together, you know.
Everybody has something to offer also. Like, that's also part of that conversation, is that what you honestly have to share is perfect, whole, beautiful, wonderful, powerful, impactful, meaningful, and focus on that. Do that thing. You know, of course, never stop learning. Of course, never stop cultivating these skills. But what our innate talents are, this is where we have the biggest impact, I think. And so, you know, spend more time focusing on who you are, how you are, what you want to do, how you want to do it, rather than what other people are doing. Mind your own business is a big prayer I'm casting out for myself this year. But you know, I think about growing up in a small Southern community, and something my very first teacher and mentor, Jackie McCloskey, who was a Christian mystic, and I was apprenticed to her for about 19 years before she passed away in 2017. But and still am an apprenticeship. Like, apprenticeships don't end. I'm learning so much more. It keeps me busy more now that she's dead than when she was alive. Damn. But she would say, you know, like, what's yours won't pass you by. You know, just to be patient, be calm, and do. Every time we cast a spell, we must follow up with like 10 tangible action steps. That's arbitrary, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But like, do 6 tangible. No, don't do 6. Never work in even. That's a very tough thing. Like 9, 9 very, very distinct, clear, accessible action steps. With every spell we cast, we must also be doing practical world remediation. So I think if we kind of look at it that way, it almost requires us to tend to our relationships with others.
How did you end up on the steps of City Hall?
It was something that a lot of my community members, I tend to step in things a lot. And so I got on the steps of City Hall because our still current mayor, Jenny Durkin, had and still has a history of aligning herself with white supremacists. She herself acts as a white supremacist actively in office and legislates in that manner. And there was, at the same time that there were active Black Lives Matter protests, there were that were being policed. Jenny Durkin, the mayor of the city, decided to grant access to the city capitol, the mayoral capitol offices. She granted access to known white supremacists, Proud Boys, and the Patriot people. I forget their name. The Proud Boys and like yeah, I think it was the Proud Boys and whatever affiliated group they were with it, and it wasn't right. And so we had been organizing privately in our community to constrain the mayor, and like we were trying to work with the offices through communication, but no communication was being responded to. So we decided to go and make a declaration and revoke her authority at a magical level as best as we could. To say something, be like, no, you like, we don't agree with you welcoming white supremacists and Nazis to the steps of City Hall. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, that's not. It's literally not what we want.
Yeah, I mean, so much of it comes down to like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, I find myself just like, there's the old, not old, the saying that's like, I don't know how to teach you that you should care about other people. I think about that one a lot, like, duh, don't have white supremacists in your, political party or in your offices. Like, duh, what the fuck is wrong with you? But here we are, and it's 2021, and we're still shouting about this. I mean,
something I wanted to say, like, first is that sometimes we want to say like duh about things that are obvious. We can just say obvious because otherwise it does come across as being ableist. So just FYI.
Thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
It's tempting to cut this out of the episode, but everybody who's listening, that's something that I had never considered and noted. And going forward, everyone, I'm leaving the ableist language in this episode simply as a learning moment for myself and for everybody who, like me, never thought of it. Obvious. Thank you.
Yes, yes. And I want to thank my friend Colleen Twombly-Borst for those conversations with me as well, because I had a hard time kicking some of those words out as well. And as somebody who lives with chronic mental health stuff, I try really hard to. It's a thin line between reclaiming words of self-empowerment that have otherwise been used to alienate and harm folks with mental health stuff, like crazy, is something I really struggle with historically as an insult to me and people I love, but also understand that even reclaiming that word is something that should be left to people who have been experienced in or who have experienced like institutionalization as a result of it. So we're all learning,
Well, I
to be a kind person. Like, it should be obvious to someone. Don't invite Nazis to my house. Like, don't do it. So that's there. And it was the first time, I have a tremendous amount of social anxiety, and I don't, as public as I am about things and as loud and as approachable as I am, I'm pretty reclusive. And it was one of the first public rituals of public activism that I facilitated at such a level. And I chose to record that and post that recording because I thought it was important for people to understand that we can take even small actions in our own local communities, and that it doesn't have to always be about targeting big, like, it's not about the big target. It's about like understanding if we're fighting fascism as witches, we fight that at every single level of political authority, from city council to mayoral to gubernatorial to president. And this was also at the time where everybody was like, heck, Donald Trump, which, cool, baby, get it. Like, do your thing, whatever. Like, be responsible, understand the limitations that you have in your practice, work within your scope, be blessed, be responsible. Virgo witch mom. But also, like, if we're hexing the president, understanding like we're attacking a seat of power, the presidency, that is built on hundreds of years of bloodshed, enslavement, genocide. We're battling blood magic. And in order to truly, and the president of the United States is not the big boss, you know what I mean? One of them. And in order to truly affect change at that level, we have to undermine the authority of the minion seats, the minions around the country. Like, we have to undermine the governor's seat, the mayoral seat, the city council, even. Like, there is no true, there's not a true system of collective governance in colonized cultures and among systems of settler colonialism or in the perpetuation of imperialism. Like, it's not possible. So I chose to, in collective with a few, like a dozen witches from community, we acted fast, because as soon as we made those declarations, we broke the staff, we laid down our judgment on the steps, we turned, walked away, and as I walked away, I was the last person. I handed off my bag to someone. I said, take all of this, just go, walk away. Because I have a cane, I had to walk slow. And I said, if somebody's gonna get arrested, it's gonna be me. I'm the slowest one. Everybody run. So, but as we walked away, literally turned the corner, 5 police cars rolled up to City Hall onto the sidewalk. And we just cloaked and just kept walking. The police kept trying to cut me off as I was crossing the crosswalk. I just put my hand out and I had my cane and I just kept walking. I was like, you're not gonna, what's done is done. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to let people know, it's possible to take up space in meaningful ways. And it's possible to take up space without taking up too much space.
And that's a negotiation that I think a lot of us are doing, figuring out how to take up space without sucking the air out of the room, and not learning anything from the experience.
Yeah. It was one thing that I and the Witches Temple, at the time when I had the Witches Temple, that was a public witches space, gathering space. It's something that I knew that we as a local community could do to take up some space, to leverage our privilege, leverage our resources during a time where there was a lot of other really important things happening that needed more, that would have been compromised had other efforts been reallocated by other communities to this. So it's something that I talked among collective with a few other local organizers and said, is this something that would be helpful? And the consensus was, yes, it would be helpful. And I said, okay, I'll do it. But it's something that just felt appropriate. And then since then, there had been a number of other smaller collectives of witches across the local area who have been stepping up to do those little battles, which is amazing. And that's what we need.
Yeah. Do you remember, I'm not sure how old you are, and maybe I'm dating myself, a movie from the 90s called Pump Up the Volume with Christian Slater?
Oh my God. Okay, yeah. I'm 39.
Okay, so yeah.
Christian Slater was my adolescent flat bank,
Perfect. So maybe you know exactly where I'm going.
And Christian Slater, many a childhood fantasy. Okay.
So for those of you who maybe are too old or too young, or are not pop culture enthusiasts, this movie was about a kid who started pirate radio in his basement, and of course the whole town was looking to destroy this voice that he had found. And spoiler alert, at the end of the movie, he's caught, and it's sort of implied that he's going to be arrested. He's cornered. But the happy ending is all of these other little pirate radio. This was before the internet, everybody. Sorry. Yeah. That was a happy ending. All of these other little voices are popping up because he did it first, or obviously not first, but in terms of the little town in the movie and all of that stuff. And I think that that's something to remember too, that we might not even necessarily see the effect that we can have, and that just because we think we haven't done enough under late stage capitalism and we haven't hustled our resistance enough, or whatever insane messages we got, that we might not even recognize how we've changed the world. And it's kind of comforting to me to know that too.
Absolutely. Or not enough people have seen what I've done, and it's it's not about. We moved when we were at the city hall. We moved so fast. We were in and out in 15 minutes. That was the limit we gave. I said, come if you'd like, but this is going to be fast. And we were very strategic. And I said, all right, let's keep 12 of you at the very base of the steps on the sidewalk with signs and protesting. Three of us are going to walk to the very top of the stairs. And then, well, I think six of us walked to the very top of the stairs. Three stopped at the lower landing. And then I just kept going. I almost walked right into the city hall. And I had people with me. Kiki was with me. And they were like, okay, you cannot go into the building. And I said, oh, yeah, you're right.
Right.
Steps. And I was like, okay, cool. Thank you for being here. Because I would have walked right into the mayor's office. I would have tried, you know. But just because the force took me, not because I'm like so emboldened. Like I seem really bold and crass and blazing, but I just get compelled, you know. We literally become compelled. But it was very strategic, and I said, you know, if you want to participate in this way, this is how it's going to go. We had just a line of people down because I needed to cast the spell. I needed to cast the spell. And I rehearsed it and I wrote it and I said, okay, this will take 5 minutes for me to do. It's going to take me a few minutes up the stairs, a few minutes down the stairs, and then we got to get gone. So everybody knew the parameters going in, and it was like a flash. By the time it was over, people there was a few people like observers in their general community who just like were walking probably on their lunch break and like, what's happening? And then it was done. And I think like the ephemeral nature of activism must also be honored.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. That, you know, that we've been trained to be so focused on the material, and that's part of our praxis as witches is to get good with the ethereal. Do you have a prayer that maybe you would like to gift our listeners with as we come to a conclusion of this portal between the two of us?
I thank you so much for the opportunity to be speaking with you on your podcast. I love your podcast. I think it's so important. And I just thank listeners.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to thank your listeners for their time and attention and welcome me into space.
And I just wanted to say to you something that you wrote to me, I'll say, but really to everyone who's going to read your book and who has. The world needs you. Yeah. You, Ylva, you yourself personally.
Everybody.
Yeah. No, the world needs you. And I'm so grateful to inhabit this same universe at this same moment in the cosmos that we get to share it together. I get really excited about things like that, like meeting people where you're like, I get to live in the same time as this person. The world needs you, Ylva. So thank you.
I appreciate that. That touches me. So the prayer I'd like to share is from my book, A Practical Guide for Witches. It's on page 97. It's a prayer for blessing. It's a blessing for family and friends. So I'll just invite folks to take a few intentional breaths to ground and to center yourself in this conversation. Allow anything that's kind of been stirred up for you to be held in a good way. And I just invite you to allow any kind of shift in your senses to occur that allows you to enter into a deeper connection to yourself at this time. I call upon the virtues of air to open the ways before those that I love, so they may access with ease that which offers them inspiration. I call upon the passion of fire to illuminate the ways before those I love, so they may access with ease that which offers them healing. I call upon the wisdom of water to transmute the ways before those that I love, so they may access with ease that which offers them comfort. I call upon the boundaries of earth to enrich the ways before those I love, so they may access with ease all that offers them kindness. May the grace of the ancestors walk with me and walk with those that I love, May all my loved ones walk in the grace of this blessing of the ancestors and the blessing of this elemental prayer, and may they find themselves remembered well. And may we all do well with what we remember.
Thank you so much, Ylva. Of course, listeners, all of Ylva's multiple projects will be listed on our website in the show notes for this episode. But Ylva, what's the best way for people who've just discovered you now through this podcast to get what you're about? If they're headed to their computer right now to start typing, what should they type into their URL box?
In your URL box, type www.traditionalmagic.com. And if you're on the Instagram, Bimbo Yaga is my handle. And of course, if you are a colonizer on unceded territories on Turtle Island, you must do your research to find who the indigenous communities are that steward your land and do everything you can to support their work, and do so without taking up too much space.
Perfect. A perfect conclusion. Thank you once again, Ylva, and to our listeners for spending this time with us, but especially to you for sharing this space and time in this moment with me. I really appreciate it. I've learned a lot, and my mind has been expanded, and my portals are opening, and I feel I'm full of magic and personal power as a result. Thank you again so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. All right, take care, y'all.
You must be a witch.
Season 6 of the Missing Witches podcast is sponsored in part by Foxglove Farm. Go to Foxglove Farm, that's farm with a PH, like pharmacy.com, and use offer code MISSINGWITCHES when you sign up for your monthly subscription box of witchy delights. And sponsored by listeners like you. You who join our Patreon and come to our coven meetings. You who buy our book, recommend it to your friends, and review it online. We thank you. And if you love this episode, tip us at paypal.me/missingwitches.